More than a few summers ago, my family visited Lake Itasca in Clearwater, Minnesota, the headwaters of the mighty Mississippi. Growing up in St. Louis, Missouri, we lived on a river town. And the river was there, the mighty Mississippi, and the Girl Scouts, as a Girl Scout, we sang songs about the barges that would take goods up and down the river. And we would sometimes go and take school trips to ride the riverboats. If you crossed the Mississippi into Illinois, you could go shopping in Illinois because in Missouri, businesses were closed on Sunday. Well, my mother was thrilled that we could walk across the Mississippi. At Lake Itasca, there's a place where the water is shallow, and there's stones, and I remember stepping into the cold water and how the rocks were slippery, but it was shallow. And my mom and my sister and my brother, we all held hands, and we walked across. And then we walked back again, and we splashed and played in the mighty Mississippi. So everyone in our Bible story today knows that Elijah is going to cross the Jordan River. And we all know, the prophets all know, that he's not coming back. Not because he can't, but because his life on earth is ending, and God is going to whisk him up into heaven. All the prophets all along the way know and tell Elisha that his teacher is going to be taken away. And you can sense the anxiety building in this story. Every time we get to a new town, everywhere along the line, Elisha, do you know your master is going to be taken away from you? Until it's, yes, I know. Please stop telling me. And then the two men come to the river, and Elijah rolls up his mantle, his cloak, a woolen cloak, and he strikes the water, and the water parts, and the men walk over on dry ground, just like Moses raised his staff at the Red Sea. And the waters parted to one side and to the other. And the children of Israel, the Hebrew slaves, walked on dry ground and escaped slavery in Egypt. It's bringing it all back. So the spirit of Moses rests on Elijah. The spirit that to confront Pharaoh, and the spirit to lead people out of slavery and oppression is with Elijah. But now Elijah is being taken away. And will Elisha be able to cross the river? What will happen to that spirit? Who will speak God's words of justice? Who will call out abuses of power? Who will set the people free? Elisha wonders that himself, and he asks for that double portion of Elijah's spirit. But it's not Elijah's to give. It is God's spirit, and God decides where the spirit blows and on whom it will rest. And so Elijah says, if you see me while I'm being taken to heaven, if God reveals that to you, you will get the Spirit. Now, if you turn to the front of your bulletin, there, of course, is an icon. And you can see that in the story, Elisha, when Elijah goes up into the whirlwind, Elisha rents his garments and picks up the mantle. But in the icon, that little Elisha is grabbing hold of that mantle. He is not going to let it go. He is going to grab on to Elijah and get that spirit no matter what. And then it's the moment of truth where Elisha rolls up the mantle and stands at the river, and the whole company of prophets hold their breath to see what will happen. And when Elisha strikes the waters of the Jordan part from one side to the other, and Elisha goes over on dry ground. So the spirit of Moses that fell on Elijah has fallen on Elisha. God will not abandon God's people. God gives the Spirit to voice justice, to continue the prophetic word. The waters of the Jordan still part. And so I stand with the company of prophets off to the side, wondering what is going to happen now. How will the Spirit of Moses and Elijah and Elisha show up for us? It feels to me like the Supreme Court just dragged women in our nation back through the Red Sea under Pharaoh's rule. Women have been stripped of our rights to control our own bodies. I feel numb. When I heard about it, I just didn't believe it. My whole life, all I've known is reproductive freedom. I'm still kind of stunned that won't be there for my daughters. I just didn't think it would ever happen. And I feel like I don't know the America in which I live anymore. And I'm very sad that it was people of a beautiful Christian tradition who, in my mind, have misunderstood the gospel. Have understood that men are divinely ordained to rule over women. And it is the conservative evangelical Christians who voted for the policymakers to keep men, mostly white men, in power. Until Friday, we were free from conservative evangelical religion. But now it depends on which state we live in. Once, in Missouri, we had to cross the Mississippi to shop on Sundays. But now those in Missouri will have to cross the Mississippi to get reproductive health care in Illinois. And what makes me shiver is what the Supreme Court will further do. When my daughters even have access to birth control? Will the court really come after LGBTQ plus people? Our denomination, the Presbyterian Church USA, supports reproductive rights. We stand in the theology that God made men and women equally in God's own image, and that Jesus is concerned about love and compassion and not about how you have sex, and he never spoke a word about abortion. The Jordan River is a symbol of freedom. And the story of Elijah being whisked into heaven in a chariot of fire has inspired that spiritual swing low, sweet chariot. It supposedly expressed the hopes of enslaved African Americans to escape slavery. Crossing the Jordan was crossing the Red Sea into freedom. Crossing the Jordan was crossing the Ohio River from Indiana into Pennsylvania, or crossing from Missouri into Illinois. And on Monday night, May 21st, 1855, a woman, Mary Meacham, helped 9 slaves cross the Mississippi River from the slave state of Missouri into the free state of Illinois. 5 were captured. 4 made it to freedom. Mary was, of course, arrested, but no one could eyewitness her, and she was released. Mary and her husband, the Reverend John Barry Meacham, were black, and they had a school for black people in St. Louis, Missouri. But then Missouri banned all education for black people. So they moved their classes to a steamboat in the middle of the Mississippi River, where it was out of the jurisdiction of the state of Missouri. And they called it the Floating Freedom School. John and Mary Meacham had the kind of spirit and creativity and courage we need today. They had the spirit of Elijah. I see the spirit of Elijah in corporations like Walt Disney and Netflix and Dick's Sporting Goods, who are offering to pay for the cost of any of their employees who have to travel to obtain adequate health care. Patagonia has offered to pay the bill for any employee who get arrested for peacefully protesting outside the Supreme Court building. Company Salesforce has just offered to relocate its employees. It's a small portion of corporations in our nation, but it is a reason to hope. Today's Bible story calls us to remember that we too have the spirit of Elijah. On the day of Pentecost, some of the fire from Elijah's chariot fell on God's people. God pours out the Spirit upon all flesh. Your sons and your daughters become prophets. Your young men see visions. Old men dream dreams. Slaves, both men and women, speak truth to power. That was Peter's sermon when this happened. And every day since then, we have been baptizing people in that same Spirit. So today we all stand on the edge of the Jordan River. And everyone should have received their little piece of wool cloth when they came in today. Just like a little bit of that fire fell on Pentecost, so today we get a little piece of Elijah's mantle. This little piece of wool. And I want us to grab onto it. Each of us knows where we need to have the spirit of Elijah in our lives. It may have nothing to do with the news, But each of us knows what freedom we need, whether it's freedom from disease or freedom from despair, freedom to get away this summer. For just a moment, let's hold our cloth and ask God to help us remember that we have that spirit of Elijah, and each of you in your hearts say that prayer for freedom that you need. May God bless our bits of wool, and may we know we have Elijah's spirit. So grab onto this, like Elisha. Use it as a bookmark. Put it on your bedside table. Maybe you want to cut just a little square off and put it in your pocket. Remember that you have the spirit of Elisha, and look around and know that everybody here is a company of prophets. All charged, all empowered to speak God's good news, to proclaim the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ. So let's show the world God's freedom and loving spirit. Let's hold hands like my sister and brother and mother and I and cross the river. We'll have to bring some daughters and sisters and granddaughters and nieces across. Like Mary and John Meacham. So grab that little piece of wool. Tuck it into your pocket. Remember you have that spirit. And you carry it with you, just like Elisha. Amen.